Is everyone wrong about the Apple Watch Series 8? September 2021, we've been hearing for months and months from the most reliable leakers in the business, Jon Prosser, Guoming and Mark Gurman, right up to the wire, that there's a full, flat-sided redesign for the Apple Watch Series 7 coming. We wait with bated breath.
Both the case and the display of Series 7 have softer, more rounded corners.
Even rounder? What the f***? Want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours? Subscribe and ring the bell. Right now everyone is excited again for the Apple Watch redesign and trying to reconcile the rumours around a rugged, athlete-focused edition of the watch and also a higher-priced Pro model, only in better materials. I think people are confusing a lot of threads, so let's try and untangle this mess. Back to September 2021. Apparently there was actually more that happened at the event, and Apple released an iPhone 13 or something as well, but no one in the tech community actually noticed. We were all in shock. What happened? We went into post-mortem mode. Apple Watch Series 7 was delayed in its release as well too.
Series 7 will be available later this fall.
Guo, weeks before, had mentioned there were massive production issues with the Apple Watch Series 7 and they'd had to hit reset. As a result, the idea of the shipments being delayed wasn't a huge surprise. How did all these leakers with independent sources all end up with the same, apparently wrong information? We were supposed to get flat sides with a new S7 chip with a double-sided system in package design, flat displays and more. Jon Prosser had even seen images of the aluminium bodies for these with new minty fresh green finishes. That might be important later. Maybe they didn't get it wrong. Did Apple have to scramble weeks before the Apple event to redesign the watch from the ground up in order to get it out? Probably not. These things take multiple years to go from concept to production, even if the Series 7 looks very much like the Series 4, 5 and 6, but with a slightly larger display, a thicker display glass, it still would be a huge job to do an actual redesign. The Series 7 that we eventually got had basically the same processor on the inside as well, an S6 chip that may as well have had a 7 written on it in Sharpie, no double-sided design, no new sensors, slightly faster charging and a bigger display. Before Series 7 was released, we'd already been hearing about the rugged version for quite some time. A watch for athletes, extreme sports people, outdoors types. For some reason, people think that this will look like the monstrosities that are G-Shock watches. No, I know Johnny Ive is gone now, but that doesn't mean the Apple design department have lost their minds. Evans Hankey is the new head of design and is incredibly accomplished, and I hope that she would never let anything like that out the door. It makes no sense in relationship to anything else in Apple's lineup. Everyone's trying to work out what this rugged Explorer Edition Apple Watch will be. Longer battery life so you can comfortably do a whole marathon with fitness tracking. That weird G-Shock Garmin crime against humanity design. And before we come back to the Series 8, I think we already have our rugged edition, Series 7. And here's my case. As I mentioned, Apple's products are not designed in weeks. The Series 7 design that we got was not a bigger enclosure to pack in all the components that they couldn't fit inside the flat design. The chip was not double-sided, and that would be a really weird thing to have just made up, don't you think? It was exactly the same as the previous year. The display glass is twice as thick. Now, arches and curves are some of the strongest shapes in nature, and they're used in architecture all over the place to add strength. Bridges have curves under them for a reason. And here's the big clincher. Because the rugged design was already in progress, which is what became the Apple Watch Series 7, and probably close to being ready to produce, switching the production from a failed Apple Watch with flat sides, and we'll come to why it was abandoned next, was a reasonably easy thing for Apple to do. They already had machining, they already had designs, they already had basically everything in place to produce them. Now, if you look at everything in Apple's marketing for the Apple Watch Series 7, it's been about how rugged and resilient it is, how it's the most durable Apple Watch ever. It is the rugged Apple Watch. Now, I think that Apple's plan was previously to launch it alongside the main version and brand it as rugged or outdoors focused, but given the production issues and the fact that it didn't look massively different from the outgoing models, they simply decided to rename it as the Series 7, fill the gap and ramp up production on that model. Everyone can now be quiet because we already have the rugged one, probably, but please don't come at me with these weird rubber designs. That's not what Apple's going to do. It looks horrific. Now, onto why the true Series 7 redesign got shelved, at least until this year from the looks of things, and what it might have evolved into. And I think it is actually an evolution. I don't think it is the design we were going to get, but I think it's along the design style that we were going to get. As mentioned before, Jon Prosser has seen these prototype bodies in anodized aluminium and in various colours and finishes with the flat-sided design. Earlier this week I made a full video detailing how Apple machines and colours their products in aluminium, so take a look at that for added context to this story, if that will help you if you've not seen it already. The flat-sided Series 7 bodies were produced at least in prototype phases, and Apple was testing finishes on these devices. Now, I don't believe the narrative that Apple was struggling to fit the components inside these cases, certainly not by the time they'd got to production lines. I think what was probably more likely to have been happening is that once these got to the assembly point, there were a large number of the frames that were showing colour issues, colour wear damage, chipping, and other flaws in the finish. Another potential issue is that aluminium is a much softer metal than the others that Apple uses, such as stainless steel or titanium in their watches, which is used on the more premium watches at the moment. If you drop an iPad, for example, on a corner, you will quite often see the aluminium deform, putting pressure onto the display glass, and more often than not, that is when the display glass will shatter. Now, I had this issue with the first generation iPad mini, and while the digitizer on there is actually quite easy to replace without even replacing the LCD, the deformation in the frame means that there's still pressure on that replacement glass unless you can reshape it or remove some of that material that's pushing in on the display's inner edge. Transfer this to a watch, a wearable that is likely to collide with door frames, crash into walls, and more stuff like that. And while Apple's custom alloys that they use are comparatively much more durable, they're still not close to the durability of harder metals like stainless steel and titanium. This could well now be why we're hearing that the redesigns will only be in higher end non-aluminium metals, and also with that flatter, sharper edge design, the anodizing wear that is a concern on the Midnight MacBook Air could also be noticeable here. The thin metal frame will also show wear and easily deform around the edges on impact on an aluminium body. But how could Apple have missed this in the design and prototyping phase though? Well, if we look back at the iPhone 4's antenna gate, we could actually have the answer there. When the iPhone 4 was released, the conductivity of people's skin bridged the antenna gaps in the bands on the outside of the phone's frame. This killed reception. Apple never saw this in their testing while out in the wild for one reason. Each iPhone 4 prototype was placed inside a case resembling the iPhone 3 design, the iPhone 3G and the 3GS, so as not to reveal the new style. But at the same time, it also prevented this issue from happening, which is why Apple then gave out cases for free, bumper cases and the like, to anyone that had an iPhone 4. Now, it's not difficult to imagine that the flat Apple Watch design would also have been disguised in an additional casing for off-campus testing, which would also have protected it from physical damage and wear. It's not a huge leap to imagine that this might be why it wasn't spotted earlier. But of course, once this got up to mass production, you're going to see a lot of those issues coming to the fore even before they leave the factory, where these casings maybe get bumped together slightly, or you see some chips and things like that coming through. Then Apple does the testing, realizes the issue, and we change direction. So now we're hearing about an Apple Watch Pro, potentially with an even bigger display option of 1.99 inches or 50.5 millimeters diagonally, which would equate to a 47 millimeter case size, as revealed by Ross Young when I asked the question on his Superfans Twitter, with a higher price as well of potentially between $900 and $1,000. But we've also heard that Apple is using the same chips as in 2022. I also think this is an issue of supply chain analytics that are potentially misinterpreting things. I think a very similar chip to the S6 and S7 is being produced by Apple, but this could be in the regular Apple Watch models, as well as, according to rumours, in the next generation of the HomePod, as that has been suggested to have the S8 chip too. I think, however, we might see an S8 Pro chip for the Apple Watch Pro, which could actually have that dual-layer, double-sided system-in-package design that we heard about before. Because if the Series 7 was about to be assembled last year, just before they had to change direction, those chips have already been produced, which is why we wouldn't see them coming into the supply chain now. They're not produced just in time for each device, they're produced en masse by TSMC as a volume production run. Even though we are seeing no new chip production for now for Apple Watch Series 8, what would have been the dual layer chip in the S7 chip is probably being relabeled as we speak as an S8 Pro. Now, whether the naming scheme for the Apple Watch 8 Pro or Apple Watch 10 with the Roman numeral 10, just like the iPhone 10, I don't know, but the timing would make sense with the 8 and 10 being co-released, just like the iPhone 10 and the iPhone 8 in 2017, and showing a leap into the future of the watch line. This is what the future of the Apple Watch could be. Now, we've heard rumours of an updated Apple Watch SE as well coming in 2022, so we could be looking at a complete overhaul of the Apple Watch lineup, though I'm not entirely convinced what that SE would be, because what would the changes be if the Series 5, 6 and 7 basically have the same processor inside, other than adding features like the always on display or some kind of high-end medical sensors like blood oxygen or ECG? Like, where's your differentiation then between the SE models and the main line? It might just be the display size. That could be all we end up with. But I think we're finally going to see the death of the Apple Watch Series 3 at least, which has wildly overstayed its welcome already. Bear in mind that Apple still sells the Series 3 watches, and they're not going to be compatible with the software that comes out this September. That's weird. That's a bit sus. The current SE could potentially drop to the $199 price point, however, and with a new Apple Watch at $350, maybe seeing a little price cut to grow the volumes, although that's probably just wishful thinking given the current climate. Then, of course, our new Pro model in the $899 to $999 range, being the cutting edge model, perhaps with some new sensor tech that hasn't hit the huge production volumes that Apple would need for the mainline Apple Watches just yet. Could we see that basic glucose monitor? Or could we see the temperature sensor come into those, or even the mainstream models? I'm not sure. I definitely don't think we're going to be seeing the glucose monitoring in the mainstream just yet. But at the higher end, and bear in mind that this would be more for monitoring your overall health and not as a medical thing for treating diabetes, for example. Put it into the sports category, not the medicine category. But let me know in the comments, would you go for a crazy premium version of the Apple Watch, or is something tech-based always going to have too short of a shelf life to get into the higher priced watch territory? I mean, it's no $10,000 Gold Series 0, but still. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to the Patreons over here if you want to join them. It's icavedave.com/Patreon, and you can help to support the channel with making videos just like this one. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one. Want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours? Subscribe and ring the bell.